rice and didn't swallow. You always were a nasty old dog, Alan. The older of the two men, Alan, made a jerking off motion with his hand, presumably for the benefit of his co-star, since of course the audience couldn't see it. Joe burst into a fit of laughter and said something about freaky women, but at that point my cheeks were red and I was trying not to listen. "It may be garbage, but it's harmless garbage," Marcy said. She closed the door on the two men. "I don't know where you got your information, officers, but we're not broadcasting propaganda here. Just old-fashioned bathroom humor." She went on, but I wasn't listening. I just seen something through the window that made my blood run cold. The inspector hadn't spotted it yet. He was staring at the closed door as if he was trying to burn holes in it with his eyes. Hell, maybe he was. I had no idea what he was capable of. His cigar smoke had taken on a shade of deep cherry red. "Do you have another station?" I cut in. Marcy paused. "Ages ago, yes," she said. "There's a radio tower about a mile away, but it hasn't been operational for almost 10 years now. There's something wrong with the building. Asbestos, I think." "Well, I don't know about asbestos," I said, pointing out the window, "but I think you might be wrong about that tower." Everyone turned to look. In the distance, just close enough to see, a steady red light was blinking in the darkness. Beside me, I felt the inspector tense up, his fingers growing tight around his fake badge. He frowned. Seatbelt dug harshly into my shoulder blades. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, fully prepared to call Marconi, but found my fingers typing out another number instead. My wife answered on the third ring. "Hello? Hey, honey, it's me." Tires rumbled in the background, and I asked, "Are you driving?" Yes," she said. "I took the kids out for ice cream. I hope you don't mind. You've been out so late, you know, and they were getting antsy." I could hear Rory arguing with Stephen in the back seat, the soundtrack of my life these days, but that wasn't the only thing I heard. There was also another voice in the car, a smooth male baritone, announcing tomorrow's weather. "Hey, do you trust me, babe?" I asked. A pause. "You know I do." Another pause, longer this time, and then, "Are you about to do something dangerous?" "Hey, don't worry about me." I glanced up at the radio tower, now looming closer than before, growing steadily in size as the car shot through the forest. "Hey, just listen, turn off the radio, drive the boys straight home. Lock the doors, grab the baseball bat. You know, the one that we keep under the bed. And whatever you do, don't touch the radio. I can't stress that enough." My wife said nothing for a few seconds, and I wondered if she thought I was crazy. Then the announcer's voice went dead. Rory and Stephen kept up their banter, oblivious of what was going on in the front seat. "We're almost home," Ruth said. "I'll make sure the boys stay inside, and Mark, stay safe." "I always do," I replied. It was a lie I'd uttered many times before and would no doubt utter again, but that was just part of the job. We'd accepted a long time ago that tomorrow was never guaranteed. "I love you," she said, and the phone went silent in my ear. I lowered it to my lap and stared through the windshield, the tower jutting out of the trees before us like a great skeletal finger, stabbing at the clouds. The red light at its tip pulsed brightly in the growing darkness. "We're here," the inspector announced, and the old wooden structure appeared suddenly amongst the trees. Its windows were boarded up, and most of the paint on the paneling had peeled away. By all rights, the place should have been dead. But there was still that glowing light up top. It flashed in and out as it broadcasted its deadly signal across the Neverglades. The inspector brought the car to a stop, and I stepped out, slipping my cell phone into my pocket. Ruth and the kids would be all right. I was the one who needed to watch his back. The front door was boarded up with a set of planks, but the inspector tore them off with his bare hands, the rusty nails squealing as they came loose. He tossed the boards casually aside. I watched them as they flew through the air, struck a tree, and tumbled to the forest floor in a heap. "You know, you're awfully strong for such a scrawny guy," I said. Even as the words left my mouth, I saw the inspector's body ripple, his true form flashing into view for a few seconds. It was like getting blinded by a 1,000-kilowatt camera flash. I had to blink a few times to clear up the afterimage. "Let's go," he said, ignoring me. "We can't afford to waste time." He forced open the door with his shoulder and hurried inside, pistol raised. I followed him into the gloom. So far, so good. except for the one big fuck-up. In my concern for my family, I'd forgot to call in Marconi for backup. If I had any doubts that we were in the right place, they evaporated the second the inspector and I stepped inside. The supposedly abandoned station was teeming with machinery. Cracked rusty consoles sat on every spare surface, vines poking through the holes in their screens, or at least they looked like vines. A closer look revealed that they were actually thick, tangled wires. The wires sprouted from the walls, too, stretching across the ground in spiral patterns, each cable heavy with purple moss. "I wouldn't touch anything," the inspector said, ducking underneath a hanging wire. "That kind of moss doesn't usually grow this side of the rift. I have no idea what it'll do to human skin." I inched forward, cautiously, being careful to tiptoe around the fuzzy purple wires. They gave off a slight metallic stench with a tinge of ozone. There was a faint humming in the air, almost imperceptible. And I realized the wires were vibrating. The closer we drew to the next room, the stronger the vibrations grew. I could feel the sound jostling around in my skull. "It's an organism," the inspector muttered. "Not just a radio wave. And its heart is close by. You can hear it." I hissed out a warning as he placed a hand on the door, but the inspector pushed it open anyway, revealing a flickering space the size of a small studio. The wires grew dense and more tangled than ever as they retreated into the dark space. The inspector brushed them aside and entered the room. I followed him, gun raised, keeping a wary eye on the tangled cables. The space between the door was another recording studio, bigger than the one at the community station, but utterly devoid of people. Tiny portable radios lay in piles on the floor, all tuned into the same staticky channel. Every so often, I heard the occasional blip of a voice that couldn't make out what it was saying. A single outdated TV set sat on a table behind the soundproof glass. The pane itself was shattered, wires stabbing through the holes, but the curved screen of the TV was intact. A dark shape lurked behind the static. I could barely make out the outline of a human face and neck. "Show yourself," the inspector said suddenly, scaring the shit out of me. His cigar smoke had turned a pungent yellow. He crossed the room and placed a slender hand on the glass. "You've proven you're capable of human speech. So let's have a conversation." The vibrating hum grew louder, and the image on the screen became less shaky. Took on a sharp line and curves. At first I thought I was looking at a silhouette, a person's face cast in shadow, but the image grew crisper. Then I realized, the hairs on my arm prickling, that the figure had no face at all. Just a pure black dome for a head, a little chunk of carefully sculpted obsidian. The stony face that wasn't a face cracked at the bottom, stretching into an unnaturally wide smile. The teeth that grinned out at us were pristine white and razor sharp. It was like staring into the maw of a shark.
"Inspector, the noble defector. Come to play with the paramecium, have you?"
It was all the voices we'd heard at the country club mashed into one. Man, woman, animal, howling, static. An abrasive mix of all the worst sounds you could imagine. Every syllable made my head throb. I wanted to clap my hands over my ears, but that would mean letting go of my gun, and I sure as hell wasn't going to do that. So I stood there and endured the voices with gritted teeth. The inspector seemed unaffected by the grating sound. "Why I'm here is none of your concern," he said to the figure behind the screen. "What I want to know is how you got here, and why you're killing these people." The shark-like smile curved upwards in an arc that would have stretched the limits of any human face.
"Because they have hands. Because they have feet, and tongues, and brains. And I'm not so gifted." Static rushed in, and the voice dropped an octave. "But you wouldn't know, would you, Mr. Too Good to walk around in a flesh suit?"
"You didn't answer my question," the inspector said. "How did you get through the rift?" The figure opened its mouth, but instead of speaking, a chorus of game show bells came ringing out. "Oh, that is the wrong question. Please step inside the box to await your punishment." Then candid laughter from an invisible audience. "Box? What is it talking about?" I said. The laughter cut out. The figure on the screen whipped its head around so fast the image blurred for a moment. Even though it had no eyes, I knew it was looking at me. The mouth opened again, and a long, orange tongue licked the tips of those razor-sharp teeth. "The brave detective," said a new voice, and I nearly dropped the gun because It was Ruth. The thing inside the TV had captured her voice to a T. I felt my hands grow numb around the pistol, but I kept it aimed at the screen. "You're not my wife," I said. "You can cut the shit now because I'm not falling for it."
"Of course I'm not your wife. I'm better than her. You love each other, but your flesh suits keep you separate. I can be in you, with you, in ways she never could. I can bring you unity, intimacy like you've never known. I can be every rush of euphoria, every surge of happiness. You want that, don't you?"
"Of course not," I wanted to say, but my lips wouldn't move. Neither would the rest of my body, for that matter. Every muscle had gone rigid. The voice continued to murmur sweet nothings in my ear, and then I felt it. Something cool, airy, and sticky crawling into my ear canal, digging invisible claws into my flesh. "No!" the inspector bellowed, and the glass panel shattered inward, sprinkling jagged shards across the floor. The TV set flew backwards and crashed against the wall. As the screen cracked, I felt the invisible presence vanish from my ear, and all at once my muscles turned to jello. My weakened body slumped against the nearest pile of wires. A patch of moss brushed my hand, and pain instantly shot through my arm, and I yanked it away. I saw that my skin had become red and inflamed, as if I touched it to a burner on a stove. The overhead lights began to flicker, and the sudden whirring filled the room. The sound of an automatic door sliding open at the far end of the studio in a darkened corner we hadn't even noticed. A pair of men lurched out of the shadows. They moved with the same clumsy gait as the corpses from the country club. The inspector almost didn't see them in time, but he reacted quickly when he did, throwing the first body against the wall and kicking the second square in the chest. The man staggered backwards. I lifted my gun and shot him between the eyes. Gray goose splattered against the walls of wires. As the headless body slumped to the ground, the shadows stirred and I shouted, "There's more of them!" I got to my feet and fired another couple of shots into the darkness. None of them hit home, but in the flash of the gunfire I saw about 5 or 6 other figures hobbling towards us. The inspector pulled out his own gun and fired at lightning speed, taking out 3 of the corpses in less than a second. But they were coming still, even the ones missing chunks of their flesh. And our ammo wouldn't last forever. "This way!" the inspector yelled suddenly, grabbing me by the arm and dragging me down the side hall. The wires here were thick as boa constrictors, and there was more TV sets strewn around the ground, each displaying the same dark, grinning face, staticky voices drifting up from them as we passed.
"Barbasol is the #1 way to soothe your existential dread of the fleshy prison you call your body. And it's 1, 2, 3 strikes you're dead at the old ball game. It's raining blood and guts over there, folks. Chunks of viscera dropping from the sky. Bring an umbrella and a vomit bucket to work. Inspector, Inspector, the monster detector. Does your friend know who you really are? Does he know the things you've done?"
The inspector responded to this last taunt by smashing the closest TV screen with the toe of his boot. The candid laughter that followed had something dark and heaving in the background, like the sound of a grizzly bear throwing up. I could feel my eardrums burning again, but there was nothing I could do except run, run, run. Finally, the 2 of us burst out of the hall into the fresh air of night. I wanted to book it to the cruiser and get the hell out of there, but the inspector held me back. "Look," he said. We were standing underneath the radio tower. Up close, I saw that every beam was teeming with purple moss, dangling from the center in a sickly blue cocoon.